Today on Losing Weight USA, we're going to talk a little bit about some misconceptions or some myths concerning low-carb diets. Lots of information out there about low-carb diets. There's a lot of misinformation too. So we're going to go over some of these myths. All right, welcome to Losing Weight USA, real-time answers to your weight loss questions, a little bit of update on latest research, a little bit of expert advice. Gives you direct access not only to me, but you should be receiving the health tips and recipes via the membership portal. And I do encourage you, get into the membership portal. Keep adding more things in there, all the educational classes, all the videos on kind of the chapters in the book, as well as kind of the menu and recipe ideas, fitness stuff. Each one of these webinars will last about 30 minutes or so. If you have questions, just type them into the chat box as we go along. If you think of things once we're all done, just give us a yell here at the Center for Weight Loss Success. The email is success@cfwls.com. Phone number 757-873-1880. All right, let's dive in. Okay, again, we are talking about kind of some myths about low-carb diets. All right, there we go. So, obviously, there are a lot of different diets out there. Okay, they're labeled all kinds of different things. Most of them have principles based on some type of healthy eating, low fat, low carb, basically low calorie, kind of working on concepts there to help people lose weight or be healthier. Okay, so there are lots of diets out there. Unfortunately, there's also lots of misconceptions about eating. And this is especially true about low carbohydrate diets. So we're going to look at some of those misconceptions and kind of sort out what's real, what's not. If I can get the slides to work. Yeah. All right. Okay. So kind of misconception or myth number one, that when you're losing weight, it's mostly water and muscle. Well, no. Okay. So the real issue there is kind of, you may lose some pounds faster on low carb. And the thought process is, well, it's faster because you're losing water and muscle rather than body fat. Okay. Well, there's some minimal amount of truth to that, because when you're on a low-carb diet, your insulin levels are going to fall very quickly, because it's carbohydrate that stimulates insulin levels to rise the most. Actually, anything that has calories in it will make insulin levels rise. Carbohydrate does it the most. So when you're on a low-carb diet, insulin levels then go down fairly quickly. And when insulin levels go down fairly quickly, you'll quit retaining water. Okay, well, when you quit retaining water, basically, then you get rid of a lot of excess water. And that's very true. And so there's less water retention. Okay? Now, the preservation of lean body mass. And so let me back up to finish that thought. So there's less water retention. So typically, then you lose weight relatively quickly. Okay, during that first week or so, it can happen pretty fast because many people retain a whole lot of water. The more water you are prone to retaining, typically the faster that tends to occur then as far as that water weight loss. You're no longer retaining water. Now, the muscle side of the whole thing, or the lean body mass. Lean body mass preservation is very important in any type of weight loss plan. But lean body mass preservation occurs by the combination of two things. One is making sure you get your protein in. Okay? So in low carbohydrate diets, typically people do talk about, hey, you got to get your protein in. It should be adequate protein, not necessarily high protein. So lean body mass preservation, get your protein in, but also the exercise. Either one of those things by itself doesn't work well. Exercise all by itself, protein all by itself doesn't work well to preserve lean body mass. It's the combination of the two. Typically in the long run, the protein's really easy. The exercise is never easy. So it is that combination of protein as well as exercise. The best exercise for preserving lean body mass is going to be weight training then. All right, so yes, you do lose some water weight right at the beginning of them. That's very real. Insulin levels drop, but typically insulin levels will drop with a low calorie diet too. So it's not that when people go on a low calorie diet, they don't lose some water weight as well. It's like, yeah, you typically do. So if you're on a low calorie diet, which typically means a low fat diet, you'll also lose weight quicker at the beginning. Okay, it typically is a little more pronounced with a low carbohydrate diet because it's not only tends to be somewhat lower calorie, but also very low carb. And the carbohydrate again makes insulin levels go down. Insulin levels go down, you don't retain water. All right. All right, myth number 2, that carbohydrates for some reason are absolutely critical to our overall health or to our diet or whatever one wants to say. And so the issue there is kind of well, we need carbohydrates for energy, especially when we exercise, right? You hear this all the time. Okay. The real answer there is that no, okay, carbohydrates actually tend to block your body's ability to utilize fat as an energy source. Because if you give your body plenty of carbohydrate or lots of carbohydrate, your body will then utilize that carbohydrate preferentially. And when it's utilizing the carbohydrate preferentially, that means you're not using your fat stores, which subsequently means you're not breaking down the fatty tissue that you have stored. And that's what we'd really like to do in a weight loss plan. Okay? So you don't want to inhibit, you don't want to do something that will inhibit the mobilization of fat. And actually carbohydrate will inhibit the mobilization of fat. Now, the kind of the background on that whole myth is that carbs are critical, is that in theory, people want to say, oh, you have to have carbohydrate to be healthy. Well, the answer is no, you don't. Carbohydrate is not an essential dietary nutrient. There is no such thing as carbohydrate deficiency. It does not exist. Okay, now there's certainly fat deficiency, protein deficiency, there's vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Those are all very real, but there is no such thing as carbohydrate deficiency. And part of the reason is because our body can actually make carbohydrate. We don't actually have to eat the carbohydrate. Our body can actually make it. And so there's not a deficiency syndrome. It's not an essential dietary nutrient. Right? Now, when we're in a low carb type of diet, very low calorie, low carb type of diet, we undergo what's called nutritional ketosis. Okay? And we'll talk about this a little bit more. But basically, under nutritional ketosis, your body can subsequently utilize fat much more effectively and efficiently, which is what we'd like to happen in a weight loss plan. Mobilize the fatty tissues, so that you're breaking down fat, losing weight, kind of where you're utilizing that fat as an energy source. Okay? And this typically happens over a period of time that we get better and better at that. It doesn't like you just flip a switch and just all of a sudden, hey, I'm utilizing fat as an energy source versus carbohydrates as an energy source. It's kind of a very slow switch, so to speak. You have to keto adapt, and that takes time. And sometimes it can take literally 1 to 2 months period of time. And in that meantime, sometimes people can feel a little bit run down. Okay. But that myth that carbohydrates are critical, just that's exactly what it is. It's a myth. Okay. There's nothing that says we are carbohydrate deficient. Okay. It's not something that's absolutely necessary. Just not true. All right. Myth number 3 then is just kind of what I'll call the opposite. It's kind of the fear of fat. Okay. And that, gee, I shouldn't eat fat because it'll make me fat. All right. And I get that fear. Okay. And my doctor, my dietitian, okay, I get, gee, a low carbohydrate diet may help with getting you to lose weight, but how much fat should you actually be eating? And part of the problem there is that we think of, gee, if it's low carbohydrate, then it has to be high fat. And there's certainly a lot of talk about low carbohydrate, high fat diet. The issue is that for my patient population that I see, it also has to be relatively low calorie, which means you can't go crazy on the fat that you're eating. So there is some healthy fear of fat, and that should be real, kind of ingrained in all of our minds, so to speak. But we can't You shouldn't, I guess, fear, maybe respect is a better thing, respect fat, okay? And that fat will drive up calories very quickly, but you can't just ignore fat. Calories, flavor, food palatability has to come from something. And so it typically often comes from carbohydrate or it comes from fat. So if we take away the carbohydrate, then, boy, if you take away the fat too, it just means, well, what's left to eat? And so all of a sudden food becomes not very palatable at all. And so you shouldn't fear fat. But on the other hand, you can't go crazy with it either because fat will drive up calories very, very quickly. Okay? But really is that fear of fat shouldn't be there. It does affect calories, and that is true. But fat has been somewhat falsely maligned as being bad. But fat basically is just an energy source. Okay. As an energy source, your body can utilize that, whether we ate it or whether we mobilize it from our fatty tissue. But when one comes keto adapted, which I alluded to earlier, when you become keto adapted, which just means that you're using ketones as your preferred energy source, okay, it becomes your body's fat, then becomes your body's favorite fuel. Okay? And dietary fat can actually be your friend on a low carb diet. Again, the qualifier on that is, well, you can't go crazy with the fat because it can make your calories too high. All right, but the fear of fat is kind of misguided there. Myth number 4, what I'll call ketone confusion. That confusion is that, gee, are ketones bad? Well, ketones are really just an energy source. It's all they are. So kind of the issue there is, gee, a low carbohydrate diet can't be good for me because ketones are toxic, right? It's like, no, okay. Now, there are different types of ketones, and certain types of ketones can actually be somewhat toxic if they go way, way high. But that's not what we're talking about in a low carbohydrate diet. Ketones, again, are just an energy source, and the ketones come from the breakdown of fat. And again, whether we ate the fat or whether our fat is being mobilized from our fatty stores, as the fat breaks down, it's broken down to ketones. Ketones are an energy source, and it actually is a very efficient energy source. Our body can use ketones much more efficiently if it's given the chance to do it than it can actually do with carbohydrate. So it's a very efficient energy source as well. And again, ketones come from the breakdown of fat. So when we restrict carbohydrate low, and typically we often tell people, less than 50 grams a day. So when we restrict carbohydrates, the fat breakdown goes up, okay, meaning, we're breaking down more fat, which when we're breaking down more fat, the ketones in our bloodstream, the ketones in our body subsequently will go up because we're going to utilize those ketones as an energy source. And this nutritional ketosis is actually very safe. Okay, and that's much different than what we often hear as diabetic ketosis or diabetic ketoacidosis. Completely different thing, and really a logarithmically different amount of ketones. Diabetic ketoacidosis will have ketones almost 10 times more than what a nutritional ketosis will have. Again, nutritional ketosis is completely safe as opposed to diabetic ketoacidosis. Two different things, two completely separate things. And subsequently then, yes, diabetic ketoacidosis can be very dangerous. Nutritional ketosis is very safe. All right, myth number 5. The saturated fat, devil or demon, that just saturated fat is bad. So kind of when we start talking about low carbohydrate diet, again, we typically say, gee, there's going to be a higher intake of fats. And when we higher intake of fats, there'll be a higher amount of saturated fats that come in, because saturated fats are basically part of any fat, just a certain amount. Okay. So an appropriate fat diet sounds good, but you still have to avoid those dangerous saturated fats. That's kind of the misconception, that saturated fats themselves are so dangerous. Okay. Well, saturated fats are, again, just an energy source. Okay. Okay. Typically, about just as an example, kind of the people often talk about saturated fats being, gee, they're high in butter, they're high in saturated fats are high in meats. Okay, and that's not untrue, but actually the total amount of saturated fat in both butter and meats is generally about 50%. So the other 50% is other, unsaturated fats. And so saturated fats all by themselves, it's not that saturated fats are bad. It's just that there should be a limit on how much fat you're actually taking in. Because if it's just too many calories, it's not going to work well for your overall health or for your weight plan. And we do know kind of that one of the best ways to actually increase your good cholesterol, or HDL, is actually to eat a little bit more of the saturated fat. That's the saturated fat actually can be converted then to the good fats, or HDLs. And now, having looked at this, literally there have been some major studies over the last almost 30 years now, revealed that there was really no connection between actual just saturated fat intake and heart attacks. That's kind of more of a misconception there. A lot of other things tend to be correlate with heart disease. Inflammatory conditions are probably the biggest one out there, but it doesn't necessarily correlate with how much saturated fat someone actually eats. So saturated fat's been demonized, but for no real good reason. That's the point there. Okay, myth number 6 is that, gee, when I'm on a low carb diet, yeah, I'm really happy I'm losing weight fast, but I may feel real faint. Yeah, I seem like when I get up, I get lightheaded. Okay, when I stand up or I exercise, get a low carb diet, I still get somewhat lightheaded. And I feel like I'm going to pass out, going to faint. Okay. The real answer there is when we go on a low carb diet is that we actually potentially need a little extra salt. Okay, which you do have to be a little careful with salt. Okay, some people are very sensitive to salt affecting blood pressure. But when we go on a low carb diet, again, insulin levels fall. When insulin levels fall, we don't retain salt, just like we don't retain water. Really, the reason we don't retain water is because, again, we don't retain salt. If we don't retain salt, we also don't retain water. So we actually waste some of the salt. Okay? Which typically means when you're losing weight fairly quickly, you actually need to take in a little bit of extra salt. Now, that doesn't mean go crazy on the thing, but it just means typically if you do feel like, gee, I'm losing weight quickly and I feel a little lightheaded when I get up, you may actually need a little extra salt, which you can add a little extra salt to food, or you can use a little bouillon or broth soup. That is a good way to add some of those extra minerals in there. So kind of what tends to happen is that during that keto adaptation period, which again can last a couple of months, okay, your kidneys kind of switch, okay, until kind of retaining salt to kind of mobilizing some of the sodium there. Okay? And subsequently then, you may need a little bit of extra salt. And it's especially true, or maybe magnified it when you exercise. Okay, so when you dilate all the blood vessels and subsequently your blood pressure may drop a little bit. And so subsequently then you may actually need some extra salt. So don't go crazy with it, but still, very commonly that can be the culprit. Not so much that it's a low carb diet making you feel faint. It's like, no, it's probably you need a little bit extra salt. All right, myth number 7. Okay. Short versus sustained weight loss. And part of the issue there is, gee, I may lose weight very quickly on a low carb diet, but I can't sustain that weight loss. Well, the issue is that, okay, it has to be a lifestyle. Okay, so the thought process there being is that, gee, if I'm on a low carb diet for weight loss, once I reach my goal, once I've kind of plateaued out and get at a healthier weight, then I need to switch then your diet, adding back all those healthy whole grains and healthy carbohydrates, right? Well, again, the reason a low carb diet works so well is because my patient population tends to be very carbohydrate sensitive. If you just kind of go back to what you were eating before, even if it's healthy carbohydrates, everybody has a tipping point. At a certain level of carbohydrate intake, they're going to struggle. And it doesn't matter if it's a healthy carbohydrate or not. That whole grain, the starches, the kind of the thing, it may not be sugar or processed food, but still, carbohydrate from whatever source can make insulin levels go up. And if you're sensitive to carbohydrates, your body doesn't know where that sugar molecule came from. All carbohydrate is broken down to sugar. It doesn't matter what. Every kind of carbohydrate is broken down to sugar. It doesn't have to just be sugar that's broken down to sugar. All carbohydrates are broken down to sugar. That's how we digest them. And your body doesn't know where a sugar molecule came from. It doesn't know whether it came from a Reese's peanut butter cup or a baked potato, or it came from an apple, or it came from a whole grain. It doesn't know. It's just a sugar molecule, and your body reacts the same to it. So it's not like your body knows what healthy carbohydrates are. We consider other, healthy carbohydrates as healthy. It's because they have a lot of other nutrients in them. And it's the other nutrients that are so good, but not necessarily the carbohydrate part of the whole thing. But a low carbohydrate diet has to be a lifestyle for people that are sensitive to carbohydrates, which 99% of my patients are. Right? For people that are sensitive to carbohydrates, they have to be very careful with any type of carbohydrate. So that includes being careful with fruit, being careful with whole grains, kind of those healthy things we often think of as healthy. Healthy does not correlate with weight loss. They're two different things. So a low carb diet, again, has to be a lifestyle. Carbohydrate sensitivity does not go away just because you lost weight. It may be, with exercise, maybe a little easier to control, but it doesn't go away. We don't actually cure that. It's like, no, you're always going to be carbohydrate sensitive. You drift on that, you'll struggle. That part we can't cure. All right, myth number 8, moderation madness, meaning that, I'm not a big fan of you can't eat anything in particular. This one thing, you can never eat that. So we're restricting kind of that entire macronutrient class carbohydrate. Seems kind of extreme, right? So I guess, again, since we got to know there's healthy carbohydrates in there, and in the long run, shouldn't we encourage moderation, a balanced diet? Well, there's some very real truth to that. I don't disagree with that concept, but I'll go back to my previous slide, and then we talked about in that carbohydrate sensitivity doesn't go away just because you lost weight. Okay? That everyone's going to have a tipping point. Now, for some people, the tipping point is so high that they never really reach it, and therefore they can pretty much eat whatever they want to. Well, I don't see that patient population. So you have to realize that the patients that I see are one end of a spectrum. Right? And the patients that I tend to see, they're very sensitive to carbohydrates. They have to be very careful. It's very easy for them to drift and subsequently go above that tipping point. If they go above that tipping point, they'll struggle. And the reason, to take that a step further, the reason that there's a carbohydrate tipping point is that at a certain level of carbohydrate intake, their insulin levels jump up. When insulin levels jump up, insulin again makes you retain water, but also turns on fat storage. So, and that's a hormonal effect. It has nothing to do with the total amount of carbohydrate. It has to do more with kind of how sensitive you are to carbohydrates. It may only take a tiny amount to make your insulin levels jump up. And if that's true, you'll find, hey, I can store fat really easy. I can gain weight really easy. And it may not be fair, but it's the way it is. And so that's part of that. It's just we can't cure that. And I do kind of agree that we would like to have kind of a moderation in our diet. I hate to tell people that, you can never have any of this, whatever this is. Okay? It's just that there are very many people that have to be very careful with whatever this was. They can have a tiny little amount. They drift on that, or they have too much, they're going to struggle. And carbohydrate tends to be kind of like a drug. You have a little bit, and your body wants more. And it's hard. It's a slippery slope. And so subsequently, you have to be very careful with that. Again, everyone has a tipping point. And part of that is that you have to kind of look at this as almost like someone who has an allergy to something. If you have a peanut allergy, it's not like, if I just have one peanut, I'll be okay. It's like, no, if you have a true peanut allergy, if you have any, you're going to, get in all kinds of problems. Or if someone has a true gluten allergy, it's like if they have a little bit of gluten at all, it's not like, oh, they'll be okay if they have a little bit. Okay? When you have any gluten at all, if you have a true gluten intolerance and true gluten allergy, it can set up a whole cascade of symptoms that can be very, very debilitating. So kind of think of it that way. Again, it typically isn't that dramatic, but still we kind of need to approach it that way. It's like you wouldn't tell somebody that has a true peanut allergy, oh, it's okay to have one peanut or two. It's like, no, that can be a life-threatening problem. So for people that are very sensitive to carbohydrates, they need to avoid them. You just have to be very careful with that. All right. Number 9 is aren't there missing micronutrients? Aren't there missing other nutrients go along with carbohydrate? Because we think of, some, healthy carbohydrates that, we need all that nutrition that's in there. Kind of the whole grains, the fruit, kind of very, very, they're very healthy. There's no doubt about that. A lot of good nutrition in there. And question then is, if I'm on a really low carbohydrate diet and I have to remove those healthier carbohydrates then, or be very careful with them, won't I be missing out on some of these micronutrients that are very essential for overall health? The answer is really no, because you can get them by eating healthy, kind of that vegetable salad stuff, kind of whole meat, protein sources, meat, seafood, cheese, and egg. They have all those things in them. Okay? And just as an example of that, I like to give the egg is one of the most close to a perfect food that you can have. If you think about it, an egg develops into a full animal. Okay? It's like, a full animal develops from an egg. It's got everything it needs in there. That's what eggs do. Okay? So, are you going to be missing something by having a low carbohydrate diet? And the answer is no. It's like, no. So if you choose a good variety of low carb foods, which eventually are good protein sources, as well as vegetable salad stuff, you're going to get everything you need. Think about it. Eggs, fish, meats, poultry, but also kind of nuts, seeds, a few berries, be careful with that. But then that wide variety of vegetable salad stuff. It's like you're going to get pretty much everything. And vitamin C, another example. Don't you have to have citrus to have vitamin C? It's like, well, no. There's lots of vitamin C in colorful vegetables, the peppers, the cauliflower, kale, broccoli. Yes, berries too, so which is kind of the fruit side of that. But still, be very careful with the carbohydrate. Doesn't matter what it is, but you're not going to miss out on kind of, essential nutrition. Just not true at all. And finally, kind of myth number 10, you'll sometimes hear about, with low carb diet, when I develop brittle bones and kidney problems, that it's the protein causes all these problems. So I've heard that diets like Atkins, keto, that very low carbohydrate, higher in protein, they can cause me to have weak bones and my kidneys to fail. And there's no evidence that that occurs at all. And actually kind of bones and collagen and what gives us strength in there is basically straight protein. Okay? And some cement that your body makes from phosphorus, magnesium, calcium. Right? So it's really not the high protein. It's really adequate protein anyway. And now, certainly if you have bad kidneys, if you do have bad kidneys, then you got to be careful with your protein intake. But it's never been shown that high protein actually makes you have bad kidneys. It's not a two-way street. It's like, if you have bad kidneys, you have to be careful with protein. But it's not that you have to be careful with protein or else you would develop bad kidneys. It's like, no, that's never been shown at all. And actually, people on relatively higher protein diets, if they have healthy kidneys, it actually improves kidney function. So generally, kind of in that 90 to 100 grams a day, there may be a few people, professional athletes, that may need somewhere up to 150 grams a day, but most people don't. Most people, it's that 90 or 100, and even in maintenance, then it often is in that 60, 70, or 80 gram range. And really, there have been multiple studies that confirm that bone density as well as kidney function improve using some of the low carb diet techniques. So it's not been shown that it does the opposite. So in summary then, yeah, there's lots of misconceptions out there, misinformation out there. And I do encourage people to kind of keep these things in mind, but also know the answers to them. Hopefully this answers some of the more common kind of questions or misconceptions that we see out there. If you have questions, again, I encourage people, pick up the phone, send an email, but as I say all the time, get into your membership site. And we have all kinds of educational materials in there, and we keep adding more and more things as well. All right, don't see any questions sitting out there at the moment, but again, if you think of things, just give us a yell here at the Center for Weight Loss Success. You can email success@cfws.com, phone number 757-873-1880. All right, should be receiving the weight loss tips and weekly recipes via the membership portal. They'll be in there, as well as kind of all the other educational materials, videos, classes, behavior modification, all those things are in there. Tune in each Tuesday, 12:15 for the next webinar. Watch your email for the invite and link. And remember, it's your life. Make it a healthy one. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.